I'm Mackenzie, 17 years old, standing in the foyer of my parents' pristine home with an acceptance letter in my hand. The floors are polished. The air smells like lavender. I take a deep breath and think, this is it. They'll finally be proud. Mom, I got into the auto restoration program, I say, beaming. But she doesn't smile. She steps forward, pulls out a delicate lace handkerchief, and wipes my clean cheek with pure disgust, as if my very existence is a stain. Before I tell you exactly how long I lasted in the real world, and how satisfying it was to prove her wrong, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. The house smelled like fresh lavender and old money, the kind of money that whispers, never shouts. My mother, Monica, stood by the staircase, her posture rigid, her face a mask of disappointment she didn't even try to hide. I just told them. I just said the words out loud. Auto restoration. Not law school. Not marketing. Grease, metal and engines. My father, Thomas, didn't look up from his tablet. But Monica? She took 2 steps toward me. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached into her sleeve and pulled out a delicate lace handkerchief. With a look of pure, unadulterated revulsion, she reached out and wiped my cheek. There was nothing there. My face was clean. But to her, I was already stained. You won't last a week in the real world, darling, she whispered, her voice soft and lethal. Girls like you don't survive without us. Then she turned her back. The door didn't just close. It slammed with a finality that echoed in my bones. I stood on the porch, staring at the wood grain, realizing for the first time that silence could be louder than any scream. Before I tell you exactly how long I lasted, and how satisfying it was to prove her wrong, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. I always like knowing I'm not the only one who had to build a life from scratch. 9 years. That's how long it took to turn that slam of the door into an empire. Today I own the premier classic car restoration shop in the city. I have a 6-month waiting list and clients who fly their vehicles in from overseas just so I can be the one to touch their engines. But I didn't start here. I started in the back seat of a 20-year-old sedan parked behind a 24-hour diner. Those first few months weren't a montage of brave struggle. They were a slow, grinding humiliation. I learned very quickly that the world doesn't care if you have potential. It only cares if you have an address. I slept with a tire iron under my blanket, waking up every hour to the sound of passing trucks, my neck permanently stiff, my skin feeling like it was coated in a layer of grime that no amount of gas station soap could scrub away. I had exactly $2,800 to my name, every cent I'd saved from secret side jobs. That money had to be my food, my gas, and my future. I rationed it like water in a desert. I ate peanut butter out of the jar because bread went stale too fast. I showered at the local community center, timing it perfectly to avoid the morning rush so no one would ask why I was there every single day. You might wonder why I didn't call anyone. Why I didn't reach out to extended family or friends. That's the thing about growing up the way I did. When you're raised by people who treat your needs as an inconvenience, you develop a very specific kind of survival instinct. Psychologists call it hyperindependence, but I call it the invisible chain. It's a prison you build for yourself where asking for help feels like admitting defeat. I truly believe that if I asked for a single dollar, if I showed a single crack in my armor, it would prove my mother right. It would mean I couldn't survive in the real world. So I starved rather than spoke. I shivered rather than reached out. That silence wasn't strength. It was a trauma response. A deep-seated terror that my worth was entirely conditional on my ability to need nothing from anyone. And while I was sleeping in a parking lot washing my hair in a sink, my parents were busy rewriting history. I found out later from an old neighbor that Monica and Thomas were telling everyone I was studying abroad in Europe. They couldn't bear the shame of a daughter who worked with her hands, so they invented a ghost who lived in Paris. They protected their image while I protected my life with a locked car door and a serrated knife. But grease has a way of getting under your skin, and eventually, it became my armor. I got a job as a sweeper at a local garage. I didn't touch the cars, I cleaned up the oil spills. But I watched. I learned. And when the old man who ran the place, Douglas, caught me fixing a transmission on my lunch break, he didn't fire me. He handed me a wrench. That was the first time in my life an adult looked at my dirty hands and saw value, not a stain. That wrench was the key to everything. I stopped being the girl who was discarded and I started being the girl who could fix anything. Except the people who raised me. The garage was my sanctuary. A cathedral of chrome and concrete where the only language that mattered was torque and horsepower. I was under the hood of a 1967 Shelby Cobra, my hands deep in the engine when the air changed. It wasn't a smell, it was a shift in pressure. I slid out from under the chassis, wiping grease onto a rag, and there they were. Thomas and Monica stood in the entrance of Douglas's shop, looking like tourists who had taken a wrong turn into a war zone. My father wore a tailored suit that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. My mother was in cream silk, clutching her purse like she was afraid the oil in the air might jump out and stain her. They looked pristine, polished, and utterly terrified of the environment I called home. They didn't spot me at first. They were looking for the manager, for someone clean. When I stood up, dropping the rag on the bench, their eyes snapped to me. There was no warmth. No relief at seeing their daughter after 9 years of silence. There was just that familiar tight-lipped judgment. Thomas spoke first. We found you. He made it sound like an accusation, as if I'd been hiding rather than living publicly in the same city for nearly a decade. It's time to put this childish rebellion behind us, Mackenzie. We're going to dinner. It wasn't a question. It was a summons. Part of me wanted to laugh in their faces, to point out the door and tell them to leave before they ruined the aesthetic. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I wanted to know why, after 9 years of pretending I didn't exist, they were suddenly standing in my shop. So I washed my hands, scrubbing them until they were raw, and I went. We sat in a booth at a steakhouse 3 blocks away. They ordered wine. They made small talk about the weather, about the quaintness of the neighborhood. It was a performance, a thin veneer of normalcy stretched over a rotting core. I didn't touch my water. I just waited. Finally, Monica set down her glass. Her hand was shaking just a little. We have a situation, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The market has been difficult. Your father's investments, they haven't performed as expected. Thomas cleared his throat, staring at his steak knife. We are facing a temporary liquidity issue. The bank is being unreasonable. They've initiated foreclosure proceedings on the house. I sat very still. The house. The showcase. The stage where they had performed their perfect life while I slept in a car. How much? I asked. $45,000, Thomas said, saying the number quickly as if speed would reduce its weight. Just to bring the mortgage current and stop the auction. We need it by Friday. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw it. He wasn't asking. He was expecting. In his mind, the hierarchy hadn't changed. I was the daughter, he was the father. My money, which they had once sneered at, which they had called dirty and low class, was suddenly clean enough to save them. Family helps family, Monica added, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I pulled back before she could make contact. We knew you'd want to step up. We knew you'd want to do the right thing. The audacity was breathtaking. They didn't see a successful business owner sitting across from them. They saw a resource. They saw a piggy bank they could smash open to fix their mistakes. They genuinely believed that their acknowledgement of my existence was payment enough for $45,000. I'll look into it, I said, my voice flat. They smiled, relieved, arrogant. They thought they had won. They thought the check was already written. They had no idea that I wasn't going to the bank. I was going to war. I didn't go home to cry. I went back to the shop. I turned on the overhead lights, the harsh fluorescent hum centering me, and I opened my laptop on the workbench next to a disassembled carburetor. My parents thought they had handed me a tragedy. What they had actually handed me was a diagnostic report for a machine that was making a knocking sound. And if there is one thing I know how to do, it is how to take something apart until I find the rot. I didn't just look into it. I dissected it. I called in a favor. One of my best clients is a forensic accountant who drives a vintage Jaguar I keep running against all odds. I told him I needed a full financial autopsy on Thomas and Monica's public records. Liens, refinancing history, credit reports. Everything that leaves a paper trail. He didn't ask questions. He just asked for names. While I waited, I started digging through what I could access myself. It wasn't hard. People like my parents, people who are obsessed with image, leave footprints everywhere. Social media posts from 5 years ago. Property tax records. It was like lifting the hood on a car that looks pristine on the outside but has a cracked block underneath. The report came back within 24 hours. Reading it felt like getting hit with a tire iron. There was no market difficulty. There was no bad investment. There was just a decade-long hemorrhage of cash fueled by a desperate need to appear wealthy. They had refinanced the house not once but 3 times. And the dates? The dates were the smoking gun. The first refinance happened exactly 2 months after they kicked me out. While I was rationing peanut butter and sleeping with a knife under my pillow, they pulled $60,000 of equity out of the house. What did they use it for? A business investment? Well, based on Monica's Facebook timeline from that same month, they used it for a 3-week tour of Italy. They were sipping wine in Tuscany while I was showering in a community center. The second refinance was 2 years later. That one funded a brand new luxury sedan and a remodel of the kitchen. The same kitchen where I wasn't allowed to eat because I might make a mess. They had literally stripped the equity out of their home to buy marble countertops and leather seats, all while telling their friends how hard it was to have a wayward daughter. It wasn't just irresponsibility. It was malice wrapped in incompetence. They had burned through hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain a facade, and now that the well was dry, they expected me to be the refill. They didn't view me as a person. They viewed me as an asset class. I printed every single page. The bank statements, the property records, the social media screenshots matching the dates of the withdrawals. I organized them into a binder, reinforcing the spine with tape. It wasn't a family photo album anymore. It was evidence. But the accountant had flagged one more thing. A series of credit inquiries and open accounts that didn't match their usual pattern. He told me to check my own credit report, something I hadn't done in years because I paid cash for everything. I logged in. I waited for the screen to load. And when it did, the rage that hit me wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. 7 credit cards. All opened in my name. All maxed out. The dates lined up with a sickening precision. The first one was opened 3 months after they kicked me out, right around the time I was debating whether to buy toothpaste or gasoline. While I was counting quarters for the laundromat, they were charging a 5-star spa weekend to a card that bore the name of the daughter they had discarded. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had actively cannibalized my financial future to feed their present desires. I stared at the screen, waiting for the explosion of rage, the urge to throw the laptop across the shop. But it didn't come. Instead, a strange, cold calm settled over me. It was the feeling you get when you finally diagnose a catastrophic engine failure. You don't get mad at the metal. You just understand why the machine stopped working. I looked at the itemized statements. Designer clothes. Club memberships. Lease payments on cars they couldn't afford. It wasn't survival spending. It was vanity spending. And that's when the realization hit me, clarifying everything like a bolt of lightning illuminating a dark room. For years I had been terrified of Thomas and Monica. I had seen them as these monolithic, powerful figures who held the keys to my worth. I thought their rejection meant I was flawed. But looking at these statements, I realized they weren't powerful at all. They were fragile. There is a specific kind of psychological rot that happens when you confuse your net worth with your self-worth. My parents didn't have money, they were the money. Their entire personality, their authority, their confidence. It was all a costume rented on credit. Without the expensive suits, without the showcase house, without the ability to look down on others, they didn't exist. It's the delusion of the empty wallet. When you build your identity on what you have rather than who you are, the moment the balance hits zero, you don't just go broke. You cease to be a person. You become a hollow shell, desperate to fill the void with anything, even the stolen credit of the child you threw away. They weren't lions. They were scarecrows. They were terrified, empty people who had spent a decade running from the truth of their own mediocrity. And right now, stripped of their assets and drowning in debt, they weren't coming to me as parents. They were coming to me as parasites looking for a new host. I closed the laptop. The fear was gone, replaced by a clinical, surgical resolve. I wasn't dealing with my mother and father anymore. I was dealing with identity thieves who happened to share my DNA. I called the forensic accountant back. "I see the credit cards," I said, my voice steady. "Is there anything else?" There was a pause on the line. A long, heavy silence that told me the worst was yet to come. "Mackenzie," he said, his voice softening. "I found one more transaction. Not fraud, technically legal. But based on what you told me about your grandfather, you need to see this." He sent the file. One PDF. A pawn shop bill of sale from 5 years ago. My grandfather never left me money. He knew Thomas and Monica would sniff it out. But he left me his 1958 cherry red snap-on tool chest. It was my childhood, my heritage, the only thing in our family tied to real work. When he died, Thomas told me it had been lost by the movers. I believed him. I grieved that chest more than I grieved them. But they hadn't lost it. They sold it. $4,000. For something worth 20. And the date matched the week they posted photos from their Mediterranean cruise. They traded my grandfather's legacy for a balcony suite and cocktails. The credit card fraud was financial abuse. This was spiritual theft. They didn't just disrespect my career. They erased my identity. I called the pawn shop. Gave the transaction number. Described the scratch on the third drawer. "Oh, that one? We never sold it," the man said. "Owner kept it in the back for storage." "I'm coming to get it," I told him. I bought it back. Printed the bill of sale. Filed it on top of the fraud reports. The weapon was loaded. The next morning, Thomas and Monica walked into my sweltering garage, desperate for the check they thought would save their house. Instead, I dropped the folder on the table. Fraud, refinancing, the pawn shop receipt. Page after page their faces collapsed. You sold him, I said. You sold the only person who ever loved me. They begged. Manipulated. Cried. I didn't move. I am the bigger person, I told them. I didn't press charges. That's my gift. But the house. It's already gone. Now get out of my shop. And they did. Weeks later their foreclosure went through. They moved into a small apartment. Their social circle evaporated. I bought the building my shop sits in, paid cash. The snap-on chest is back where it belongs. Above it hangs the framed receipt. Not just proof of what they stole. Proof that I took my life back. Family isn't blood. It's the people who respect you. I built my own family out of grease, steel, and the ones who show up. I'm Mackenzie. A master mechanic. I built this life one bolt at a time. If you've ever had to cut a dead branch to save the tree, share this. You're not alone.